the UK has a duty to prevent genocide as laid out clearly by the International Court of Justice. It must implement a full arms embargo on Israel now and implement trade sanctions. The UK, Canada and France have said that they will commit to more concrete actions if Israel doesn't allow aid into Gaza and stop its attacks or stop its expanded attacks on Gaza. But so far we've seen very little to show that they're going to put that into action. And I think there's a very real worry that these words are symbolic and maybe an attempt to manage perceptions at home over these countries' involvement in Israel's attacks in Gaza, in particularly the UK's role so far. So earlier this week, the UK did announce that it was going to suspend talks over a new trade deal with Israel. Now, these talks should never have been taking place in the first place. The UK should not be engaging in trade talks with a country under investigation for genocide. But we're talking about a future trade deal here, and cancelling or even just putting on ice talks over a future trade deal isn't going to save lives in Palestine, in Gaza today. We're worried that without urgent action, and obviously the situation is extremely urgent as people are starving to death in Gaza, and Israel is expanding its operations with warnings from the UN of ethnic cleansing, we need to see much more comprehensive consequences for Israel. And that's why we're calling for a much stronger set of sanctions from the UK government. So the UK's decision to suspend 10% of arms licenses to Israel came after heavy pressure in the UK from campaigners, activists and lawyers, but it's still deeply insufficient. We heard in recent weeks that the UK, in the 3 months after banning some arms licenses to Israel, the UK exported around £128 million worth of arms to Israel. When we know that Israel is under investigation at the International Court of Justice for genocide, when it has been accused of some of the most serious war crimes by the UN, this is clearly deeply insufficient and makes the UK surely an active participant in the genocide in Gaza. So we need to see a complete arms ban on Israel now. Anything less is certainly complicity, risks active participation in the genocide, and sends a clear message that whatever the government is saying, and however critical it may be of Israel's latest expansions of its attacks on Gaza, it's still ready to provide this military support, this material support for Israel's military, and certainly a full arms ban is necessary. We'd also argue as well that as well as removing military support for Israel, the UK needs to think seriously about putting proper economic pressure on Israel. So while it's suspended talks over a new trade deal with Israel, its existing trade deal with Israel remains in place. And this is a trade deal, by the way, which contains within its very text that human rights form an essential part of the agreement. I don't think it's hard to see what more Israel could do to destroy the foundations of that agreement. It's clearly, and the government has acknowledged itself that the government has made clear in its assessments that Israel is violating international law with its attacks on Gaza. So we want to see that suspended. We know that the EU is considering suspending its trade deal with Israel, and we want to see real economic pressure on Israel. This is something that the UK government has done in the case of Russia. They've put huge economic sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. And if it doesn't want to look hypocritical, the UK should be really doing the same in the case of Israel, in enacting a comprehensive set of sanctions to put pressure on it to comply with international law. I think if the UK is worried about backlash from the US, from the Trump administration. It needs to take a lesson from other countries which have showed more courage in their approach to putting pressure on Israel to uphold international law. So we've seen, for example, countries like South Africa, which filed the case with the International Court of Justice, filed the genocide case with the International Court of Justice, which is trying very hard to hold Israel responsible for its crimes in Gaza. Now, South Africa has come under heavy pressure from the US to withdraw that case, but is persisting in continuing with that and trying to ensure that international law is upheld. The UK has an obligation to do that as well. And I think in terms of domestic forces in the UK, I think there's huge public support for Palestine and an absolute horror at the genocide in Gaza and the crimes that Israel is committing there. And I think the government would have significant support from the UK if it was to from the UK public if it was to enact a full arms embargo on Israel and implement economic sanctions. And it's really important that it shows some courage and does this rather than continuing to provide this window dressing which suggests a degree of concern, a degree of outrage about Israel's actions, but which fails really to do anything significant to put pressure on Israel to end them. The UK has a duty to prevent genocide as laid out clearly by the International Court of Justice. It must implement a full arms embargo on Israel now and implement trade sanctions.